It is the same night that I re-recorded Dorian Gray and 12th Night. However, this time I finished a book on my own accord. It was Elemental P by Mark Dunn. This book was for a very long time one of my favorites. I think I probably first read this when I was in 7th grade, and this was really the only book I ever reread multiple times until I was probably in 11th grade, and then I hadn't read it since, until now, right? Still one of my favorite books. I think it's a very, very glorious thing, right? Because I think it speaks to a lot of things that I really like about literature, but also things outside of literature, right? This novel, number one, is epistolary, which is a novel through letters, which I've always loved. I think it's a really interesting way to present a story. It makes it feel much more personal. So I really, really love this. It's also a lipogram, which is another really fascinating thing to me. Lipogram is basically the intentional misuse or abandonment of specific letters or avoidance of certain letters. I'll get more into that when I talk more about the story, but lipograms have always fascinated me. There's a very famous lipogram in which I think it might have been an entire novel, but I believe it was a short story that did not use the letter E at all, which is incredibly fascinating. When I was in high school, I, for a very long time, thought about trying to do this in a very similar way, but instead of intentionally excusing or omitting letters, I was going to try to do it with only using what was on the periodic table, which is still a really fascinating idea to me. It's just I don't have the mental capacity to write that, right? So that's that. Also, this book, Elemental P, deals with pangrams, which are sentences that involve all of the 26 letters of the alphabet in English. Certainly, if you do pangram in other languages, you would be using all of the letters in the alphabet for that language. But for English, it's all 26, right? So yes, all of those things, right, are things that really fascinate me. I think fascinate a lot of younger kids. But all those things really fascinate me, which is why I still find the book really interesting, because it is a novel, but it's also a puzzle, right? It is a puzzle on how to read. It is a puzzle on the need for morphemes. It is a puzzle on the you could probably hear my cat meowing at me. It's just a wonderful puzzle with the literature, which I'm fascinated by and really, really love. Novel itself, published in 2001. I think I can make connections to the US in 2001, but I don't know if that's actually there or not, or if that's just me being able to go back with hindsight. But the novel itself, right, focuses on fictional town of, or fictional island of Nulip, which is off the coast of South Carolina. And basically what it is, it's a small island that has one claim to fame, in which a person from there developed the phrase, "the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog," which in of itself is pangram, and the most used pangram in English because of its shortness. I believe it's 36 characters, but also because it is so simple, right? There's no words there that are incredibly hard to think of or considered adult type language. They're all very, very simple words, which is why we use it. So that's kind of the basis of it, right? Then there's a statue. Letters that are on the statue start falling off one by one, and this very small council of people, of 5 people, basically decide that when a letter falls, and if it is the last letter that is up there for that letter, it is then banished from ever being written or being spoken on the island again. And each person gets 3 strikes. After the 3rd strike, they are immediately removed from the island, sent to the United States to try to figure out a way to live. So you're dealing with themes of oppressive government that doesn't quite make sense, right? Like that's really one of the main themes in here is an oppressive government that is making decisions that don't quite make sense, and any appeals to science or to reason fall on deaf ears. Part of that, right, is that they are worshiping a person, a singular person, right, which then gets into roots of zealotism, fanaticism, and what all of that means for a community, right? Is that if your people in power are so singularly focused on the presentation and acceptance of one thing and they can't accept anything else, well then anything else is heresy. So that's one of the that's really the main issue that gets dealt with a lot, is the idea of zealotism and heresy. The other thing that gets dealt with is that what starts happening is, as people are forced to leave the island, the members of the council can start claiming the land of the people that have left or have been banished, because of very old statutes that exist, right? And so what starts happening is the police force and other various zealots are tasked with effectively stalking and keeping track of everyone else that is not part of this cult-like community, and then reporting every single instance, right? So that the 5 priests, the High Council, can take up all this land and take up all this property and do whatever they want with it, because the end goal starts to become, well, now that this is like progressed past 2 letters, we can start to do whatever we want with the letters. And if everyone leaves and it's just 5 of us, 5 families left, well, who cares? We can just revoke all the mandates and be the rulers of this island, and no one will care, right? So that's really a huge part of it. The other part of this, right, is the issue of giving up freedom, right, and giving control over to a small entity, which is something that we have to trust, right, in a society that has a government, is that we have to trust that a smaller group of people is going to do the right thing, which in Null's case does not happen, because what happens is the first letter falls, and the first letter is Z. And so even to us thinking about this, right, we would go, oh, if we could never use Z again, it wouldn't matter. No one would care. But then you also think about the fact that when you look at novels, right, the amount of times that that a singular word with letter Z in it appears, all of a sudden that entire novel, that entire book, that entire textbook is gone, right? The second letter that falls is a Q, which once again, we don't really think about, right? It's not a letter that is commonly used. So yes, so Q is the second letter that falls with the statue, which once again we associate with this idea of not being a very used letter, right? And being a letter that is, in a lot of people's minds, barely a letter, right? And so that one gets rid of. And then the third one falls, and that's a J, which once again falls into this category of letters that we don't think of as being used all that often, right? Very famously, I think the most difficult word to guess in Hangman is jazz, because they are, 3 of his 4 letters are some of the least used letters in the English language, right? And then finally, the 4th letter comes, and it's D. And all of a sudden, we can barely use past tense anymore. And one of the most important letters in the English alphabet is suddenly erased. But the council decides, we've already gone too far, we've already committed to this, so we just got to keep going, right? Which then encompasses the rest of the story, right? It is a group of people that were entrusted to lead and entrusted to make the right decisions, and they make the wrong decisions. And then when it gets to the point of where there's actual consequences, they can't turn back because they've already committed to it. Which, you know, certainly speaks, I think, a lot to a lot of feelings of government and control, right? That's that. And then we finally get to the end, right? Because a lot of the middle stuff isn't inherently important to talk about, right? It's mostly just it's families being broken up, and it is backstabbing and people using old grudges to turn against people and usurping other people, and you know, the use of power and control to get people that they don't like out. But then all of a sudden you're left with no one to run the power plant and no one to run a store anywhere, so people are living off of rations. You know, people are barely surviving, but it's because of the early days of this mania in which everyone's turning against each other, because these new laws mean that you can just do whatever you want to other people. Very much in line with the very wonderful Red Scare. So that's that. And the end happens. And what ends up happening is Ella, who is really our main character, probably a third of the letters are from, actually no, Ella doesn't write a whole lot. It's usually Tassie that we see writing, but Ella is super important because Ella is the one that is the last one that's really heading up Enterprise 32, right? Which is the challenge that is made in which, because they can't convince the council, the high priests, to forget the whole thing, and you know, after being shown an analysis of the glue, say, oh well, how do we not know that NOLIP is not working through the glue and working through science? They accept the challenge in which if anyone can write a sentence that contains all 26 letters of the English alphabet while also not going over 32 letters in total, well then everything will be reverted back to the way it was. And so that's what Enterprise 32 is. It's that working on that challenge, and Ella is the last one that's left working on it. And Ella is effectively living on an island with like no one else on it at this point. Almost all of her neighbors have left, either because they've been banished or because they just fled, because that's no way to live, right? Being under constant government surveillance and all of that. And so she's the last one working on it, and she's basically just going through old letters that were not destroyed from her family. And as it turns out, her father happened to write this sentence: "Pack my box with 5 dozen liquor jugs." Happened to write it as he was being banished, and hid the letter. And it was a sentence that's in stories written in the heat of the moment, and it's just written completely off the cuff, right? And really what the argument here is, which I also agree with, is this idea that we cannot worship other people, and we cannot put other people to the extremism that we do, because so much of what we think of and so much of what is deemed important by others, so much of it is off the cuff. So much of it is done in the heat of the moment, and it's only when you remove it from itself and remove it from the context of the world that suddenly things seem like they're important, right? And so she ends up submitting this sentence, it gets accepted, and then, right, there's this whole argument of, well, we think that we should commemorate a statue to either you or your father, because you were the one that submitted it and saved us all, but then also your father wasn't the one that wrote it. And her answer is, well, who the fuck cares? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that we showed that Nevin Nullup, who is the fictional person who wrote Quick Brown Fox, just came up with it off the top of his head, and it doesn't matter. At the very end, they get led down to the inner caves of documents and whatnot, and there the joke is that, or the great irony of it all is that what is found is the great almighty sentence. The initial childlike scrawling of it is written in some random children's book, in which all you had to do was rewrite the sentence to be more grammatically correct, and suddenly you have this great almighty sentence that they worship over, right? And so, which then goes back to this thing of, zealotism and the way that we worship other people, whether, certainly by actual worship, but also through just putting them on a pedestal, or the constant commendation of who they are, right, is oftentimes without due, because people are people, and sometimes people have sparks of brilliance, and sometimes people have continuous sparks of brilliance, when in reality we're all just people, and some of us just aren't given the opportunities to present this. Yeah, that's that. Still one of my favorite books. Mark Dunn has written a lot of plays. I think this was his first novel. He's written a lot of plays, but certainly fascinating novel, right? fascinating way to write a novel, an approach to writing a novel. And yeah, probably an 8, maybe an 8.5 because of nostalgia. You know, I certainly still love this book. I think it's certainly still great. This would be one that it would be hard to teach, but I think it would certainly be fun, right? So yeah, that's that. That's Elemental P.